What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Inside the Burrow. My name is JJ Metz, and I'm joined by Richard Pereira and Robbie Listella, who's going to be doing a lot of written work for baseball on the FAU OWLS site. Richard, speaking of baseball, the baseball season is starting this Friday with FAU taking on number 6 Vanderbilt. Can you just give us a little season preview on the baseball side of things as it's starting up this week?
Yeah, definitely, JJ. When it comes to this upcoming season for FU baseball, it's a transition year for the program, and there's two reasons to that. The first one is obviously they're moving on from Conference USA to the American after spending 10 seasons with Conference USA, getting multiple appearances in the NCAA regionals, and just having talented rosters that saw a couple of players get drafted to Major League Baseball. And the second reason is because it's a transition year, is that the entire starting lineup for FU baseball is pretty much new. All the original starters from last year at the beginning of the season are all gone. And most notably, Nolan Shanuel, who went on to become drafted by the Los Angeles Angels last year over the summer, as he's the highest ever Owl to be drafted in any major league throughout all American sports. He was drafted in the first round. He was a top 10 pick, got drafted by the Angels, and he simply broke history. He broke a barrier that no other Owl could have accomplished until he did. So Shanuel was a spectacular Owl throughout his career at FAU, firing multiple home runs at the park, torching opposing pitchers whenever he went up to bat. It was just a remarkable career for Shanuel, and it's going to be very interesting to see how FU moves on from him, as they now have a new starting line. Well, not entirely brand new, because there are some players who were with us last year that are returning this year. Most notably, John Schroeder, who was the backup to Caleb Pendleton, who also went on to who signed with the Angels last summer alongside Shanuel. And then you have Spencer Rich, who is a talented player at center field. Jalen DeBose, who had his moments last year. Just a mix of returning guys who were a starter or played in the second unit as a backup, and then the bullpen is going to be entirely different. Hunter Cooley, as Robbie wrote about in a very recent special, that he'll be a special assistant with his fellow head coach John McCormick in the coaching staff. He is going to be helping the bullpen become a lot stronger for this season. They had its ups and downs last year, but McCormick believes that the depth at the bullpen is much stronger, and it's going to be the team's strength this year. Most notably, their starting guys. Trey Beard, who is a freshman coming out of high school, he'll be one of the starting pitchers. He's very talented, can get a lot of strikeouts, is very hard to get runs on him, score runs against him. Tyler Murphy, who garnered all CSA all freshman honors last season, and then CJ Williams, who shows that he can be a relieving pitcher and a starting pitcher. But he's going to be starting this upcoming weekend against Vanderbilt, who is ranked 6th in the country. There's so much to think about when FU baseball is just retooling its roster year by year, especially this year with the amount of guys they lost over the offseason, but adding a lot of guys this season. And with the bullpen being as strengthened as they are now, and then the retooled starting lineup, the potential of this team is sky high. And it will be very interesting to see how the starting lineup just gains chemistry with one another alongside with the new guys and the returning guys. It will be a very fun year for FU baseball, regardless of what happens.
Yeah, 100%. And FAU baseball, I mean, last year really wasn't that great compared to most FAU baseball seasons, but this year they have a chance to do better. As you mentioned, that top 10 pick in Nolan Shanuel to the Angels was absolutely remarkable for FAU. And they do lose other players, as you mentioned, some pitchers like Hunter Cooley and Jacob Josie departing from the pitching staff, but they do still have Tyler Murphy, Trey Beard, and Dylan Auburn, to be railed upon, to become some of the starting pitchers this year as well. So, FAU baseball could be pretty good this year, looking to be good in a new conference in the AAC, which is very different from Conference USA. I mean, you have a ranked team, a top 15 team in East Carolina that you'll play. You have number two Florida on your schedule. You have a good Vanderbilt team, number six in the country, where a real series is happening. So FAU will have some challenging games, and hopefully they can, fare well in the American Athletic Conference. Now, switching the topic over to basketball, FAU went 1-1 last week in both games resulting in overtime. FAU did lose the UAB game, but they won versus Wichita State. Robbie, I'll go to you about UAB. Really, FAU started the first half very well, but was up seven at halftime and really just struggled on defense, and rebounding the ball. Yaxel Leningberg, 21 rebounds for UAB. Eric Gaines was pretty much cooking up this FAU defense, getting to the hoop, causing contact, and making every shot. What would you like to see FAU do different versus UAB, especially in the second half, to really improve and start winning these games?
It's tough, right? Because UAB is a good basketball team, and so it's not more of like they did a lot. I mean, in the second half, UAB just really stepped up their intensity. There wasn't too much I really didn't like from FAU. It was just I guess how I've it's even tough saying I would have wanted them to call the timeout in that last second situation there and maybe not have it go to overtime, but that's how they play, right? They trust. Coach May has such a good trust with his guys that if they call the timeout there, then that goes away from their game plan. So maybe just try to find a better shot on that last possession. If there's one thing I want to take away from the end of the second half of that game, really. And really, it's just Elijah didn't get. It's if Elijah gets going in that game himself alongside the other guys who performed. I mean, John L. Davis almost put up 40 points. So it's like we just needed one little extra kick from somebody else. Nick Boyd struggled a little bit as well, but he was getting good looks. So just the shots will fall. UAB has been trying to beat FAU now for a couple of years, so it was going to happen eventually. It happened on a road game, luckily. So hopefully the bracket makers will take that into account. And they will. It was a close game. They played them right up into the end. I like what I liked. I like that they didn't. I like that they didn't stray away from their game plan. They stayed with it, and sometimes it's tough AAC basketball, right? Sometimes the shots that just goes the other way. And unfortunately, that happened that night. But they rebound, as we'll get to Wichita State. They rebounded and they got back on track and proved overtime isn't too bad when the shots are falling.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, I mean, it's hard to win in this conference, especially on the road in Bartow Arena, where FAU hasn't beat UAB there. That's one of the hardest places to play. We saw some really good teams in conference like Memphis lose there. So, it's definitely not an easy place to play at all. And as you mentioned, I mean, the team kind of relied on John L. Davis in that game a little bit too much, where the difference last year was that they could rely on other guys as well to make shots in tough moments. And they were just putting 100% of like all possessions to John L because they trust him more. If other players like Elijah Martin can get going, Vlad Golden especially was super aggressive in that Wichita State game. Maybe like perimeter shooting wise, you could get a Weatherspoon or Gaffney hot from three, and you won't have to rely on one singular guy. Um, One thing, as you mentioned, was rebounding. That I don't really think that they did a great job on defensive rebounds. UAB out rebounded them 33-24. So that's definitely something that kind of has to improve. And in overtime, especially like Lenenberg got those two offensive rebounds in a row. UAB got a third chance at a three and got it. And the timeout call, I mean, you trust your guys. I probably would have taken the timeout, but as Coach May said, he wants basketball to play. He wants the game to play out how it will, and that'll take care of itself. Moving on to Wichita State, we saw a completely different overtime scenario. And that was a game where the team didn't have to rely on John L. Davis. You saw Brandon Weatherspoon, 19 points. You saw Vlad Golden, 20 points. John only had 12 in that game, and he contributed massively, but they didn't have to rely on him 100%. And the overtime was completely different. Richard, talk about that game and just what are your thoughts on the FAU getting a road win in Wichita?
Yeah, it just showed that FU learn from their learn from their mistakes from the UAB loss. Like they made sure to put their foot on the gas pedal and never look back. Like on the very first seconds of that overtime period, you see Brandon Weatherspoon get the first bucket of the game. Elijah Martin, who did not make a shot throughout all of regulation, he gets a shot in, and then Vlad Golden joins the party. He gets his shots in, and one of them being a monstrous one-handed dunk off an offensive rebound, which was the only miss of that overtime period from FAU when as they went on to torch Wichita State by double digits in that overtime period. And a lot of that can be contributed to Brandon Weatherspoon, who had a spectacular week. Even with the loss at UAB, like he had a great stat line in those two contests. When it comes to scoring the ball, shooting the ball, wherever he was on the court, whether it was inside the arc, outside the arc, he crashed glass a couple of times, and he just did everything he could as a 3-and-D player that he is. And FU should be more than grateful that he stepped up at the right time, especially in that overtime period. And props to Elijah Martin, who was off for most of that game, and then he came alive in overtime. And same to Vlad Golden, who finally showed up as the enforcer that he should be, in down low inside the paint as the bullying man. We know he is capable of inside the post, inside the paint as a post player. Like we know he can bully matchups down low, and I would like to see more of that on a game by game basis, because unlocking Vlad Golden's offensive skill, which we know he can explode at any given moment, as he did against Wichita, that should be emphasized a lot more as the season winds down, which we only have like a couple more games left to keep track of, as we only have 7 games remaining on the schedule. Like we have to be very cautious about the consistency of key players like Vigo, like Elijah Martin, of course, Janelle Davis, and then the role players of Nick Boyd, Brandon Weatherspoon, Brian Greenlee, and everyone else.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, Brandon Weatherspoon, I think one of the most underrated players in college basketball. That's why we have him on FAU Owls Nest as a top 12 player in the American Conference, one of the better defenders, and he just contributes to the team so much with not many minutes, but he's a great three-point shooter. Like his percentage is up a lot from last year, and we saw him hustling on defense too. He went down a few times in that game and got right back up. And he's just a fighter. Now, Robbie, before we get into the preview this week of Temple and USF, a lot of FAU fans are not the most happy right now, as FAU is kind of under exceeding what expectations thought, as they were supposed to be a top 10 team. So now they find themselves not on the bubble of March Madness, but you see them as a 7, 6, 7, 8 seed. For those people watching, FAU has 7 games left, a really tough 6-game stretch in your last 6 games with 5 quad 2 and quad 1 opponents combined, 5 total. What does FAU have to do these last 7 games? What do you think, to be safe in March without having to rely on winning that American Conference tournament, for the people just wondering about how FAU can make it to March?
Well, I feel like that's something you can debate endlessly, right? I mean, anything can happen. If Memphis is able to win out the rest of their games, and let's say we split with Memphis, and if Memphis wins every other game besides the split with us as well, I think that just sets it up for maybe both teams not even needing to. I see one of the two teams, Memphis or FAU, winning the conference in the tournament. So I think if both of them go undefeated besides splitting with each other down the stretch, I think that sets both teams up for good success, trying to get an at-large bid for whoever doesn't win the tournament. But at the same time, it's something you can debate endlessly, right? I mean, FAU could still lose those two games and still find a way to get into the tournament with an at-large bid. There's still so many things that are at play. What you like to see is that they bounce back against Wichita State with a big win. A couple days after losing a road game, so they just got it. They're getting healthy as well. Rosado will be back, which is huge for that rotation. And what it does also is it allows the rotation to be a little deeper now because Trey Carroll's played and he's played well in my opinion. He hasn't played exceedingly well to take minutes away from Rosado when he comes back. But I think he's earned his role in his own way, and so that can only benefit this team in the long run, and is having another guy, especially a forward that can play valuable minutes. So there's really not a one pinpoint thing they can do to improve themselves, but it's just it's like Coach May has been talking about all season, continue to get better and playing their best brand of basketball come March, because barring any crazy losing stretch, which I don't think will happen, God willing, anything can happen. It's basketball, but barring anything like that, I think they're already in a position to get an at-large bid, and as long as they continue to play good basketball, compete with everybody, win the games that they should, and like I said, split with Memphis, I think everything will be okay, and just be the best basketball team they can be and when they get there.
Yeah, there's going to be some really tough games coming down the stretch, especially Memphis, as you mentioned. But we're going to focus on this week. FAU has 2 games, and they have to, before they worry about other teams, they have to look at these 2 games, one game at a time. And up first is Temple. Richard, when you look at this Temple basketball team, what comes to mind?
I was about to talk while I was muted, but okay. Well, when it comes to Temple, they are very heavy on the 3 ball. They attempt the second most threes in the American Conference, only behind UTSA, which is quite understandable. UTSA is quite potent on the offensive end when they have a player like Jordan Ivy Curry who can go off for 30 plus points on any given night. But for Temple, even though they take a lot of threes, which is also 18th, they are not as efficient with the 3 ball as they'd like to be. They're shooting under 30% from downtown. That puts them in the bottom 30 of the country among the worst 3-point shooting teams in the nation. And when you look at their overall shooting split, they are the worst in the American, 4th worst out of every team in NCAA Division I basketball. So it's a lot of question marks when it comes to Temple. Like, they have shown the ability to compete. After all, like FAU, they also have their fair share of overtime games, including 2 of them being back-to-back overtime games. Like, they had their share of overtime games as well, like FAU, and they're just coming off a 3-point loss to Charlotte, who has exceeded a lot of people's expectations to how they would perform in the American, having a top 4 record in conference play in their first season as an American member so far. So for Temple, they rely a lot on the 3 ball, even though they haven't been as successful as they'd like. Though they do have a talented shooter in Matteo Piccarelli. He has the most 3-pointers made with 49 on 36% shooting from deep. And then you look at Heiser Miller. He leads the team in scoring with 15.6 points per game, but he hasn't done well in being efficient with the shot making. He's only making 34% of his total attempts, which is a couple of percentage points worse than Elijah Martin, who is also shooting a sub 40% from the field. So a lot of struggles Temple has had this season, but they have shown the ability to compete against teams that are supposed to be better than them. They can stay within single digits. So it's in a matchup that FU shouldn't underestimate, especially considering that this is the first ever matchup FU is having against Temple in program history.
Yeah, especially, when you're playing a team like Temple, that is a must-win game that you're supposed to win. And as you mentioned, Charlotte has been over-exceeding expectations, which is a team. Another team in the American that has been over-exceeding expectations is South Florida, and they've won 9 straight. They're sitting at top of the conference. FAU will face off in Tampa against South Florida, who's 17-5, 10-1 in conference play. And they're getting votes to be in the top 25. They received 3 votes this week. I believe 7 total AP points. And this is a game where FAU has an opportunity to get a huge win in Tampa versus University of South Florida. And, if FAU can get this win, huge in terms of AP rankings and moving up in bracketology. Now, South Florida right now is playing like super hot, and they're clearly a second half team. They are having huge comebacks. I mean, they came back a lot in that Charlotte game. They were down like 15 against Rice at halftime, came back. They're down 21 to Memphis, came back and won all those games. So what does FAU have to do, Robbie, to not be, fall victim to a team that's blowing a big lead like we saw in March Madness last year for San Diego State?
They're just gonna continue to just play good basketball. Obviously John L is gonna continue to need to play at the high level he's been playing, but outside of him, the thing about USF is they have a lot of different guys who can take over games and lead them. It doesn't need to be young blood. It doesn't need to be Miguel. It could just be Reed, or it could be Kobe Knox going off. And it's just their depth that makes them so difficult. So FAU is going to need to be able to match that. And they have no problem doing it. As we've seen, Brandon Weatherspoon can go off for 20 on every given night. Nick Boyd can do the same. Elijah Martin is one hot streak away from being back in the NBA conversation. So it's like FAU has these guys to combat the offense against USF, but they can't fall victim to their early cold streak habits, and they just have to play a complete and full game. It's gonna be a close game. It's gonna be a battle. It's an afternoon matchup in Tampa. It's not gonna be easy. It's gonna be it may go to overtime. It's gonna be a Bartow Arena type atmosphere. But FAU is just gonna need to match the energy. Play big, right? I mean, they have Kayshawn Pryor, he's 6'10", I think, but he's not anything too crazy. They're big. They don't have anyone crazy big. FAU's guys, Trey Carroll, Vlad Golden, the bigger guys, Brendan Lorient, they're going to need to play physical and match the energy. And they have, I don't think FAU has really, there's not a problem there. I think FAU can really win this game, but it's going to come down to, can they bring the same energy as USF is bringing on their home court and a chance to become a ranked team with that win? We'll see.
Yeah,
I think they can.
yeah, and as you mentioned, I mean, this is going to be a close game. I don't expect it to be like how these two teams played in football, which was also in Tampa Bay. I do not expect a curb stomp smack from this game. But speaking of that, we're going to get into prediction time. Richard, 2 games this week, Temple and USF. Starting with Temple, what is your prediction for that game? And then give us your USF prediction.
Well, what FU has to do is feed the ball to Vlad Golden early on, similar to how they did against Tulsa. Just feed him down low and just let him cook in the post. Like, let him post up, let him bully his matchups, and let him go up for thunderous dunks that will energize the crowd. Since this is a home game, after all, BU fans, I really mean it, and then it's just suffocating them from the perimeter. Like, they take a lot of threes and they miss a lot of threes, even though their game is centered around their three-point shooting. And they do have a few good shooters, as I mentioned with Matteo Piccarelli. They are not as consistent as they like. So pressuring them all over the field, making them take very highly contested shots that have a very low chance of going in, and just simply playing good team basketball. Like, move that ball around. Do not waste too much time on the clock, waste too much time trying too hard to find the perfect shot. Just find a good shot. Set up your teammates to succeed with the shot selection that they can have while they're on the court with the playing time that they have. and just trust one another and just be aggressive. Like that's key to FU just succeeding in this game. And I think they blow Temple out of the water. And I think it's going to be a 20-point victory for FU. I'm going to go FU 90 to Temple 70.
And for USF too.
And for USF, USF has made so much progress. 2 seasons ago, before this one, they were an 8-win team. They were one of the worst teams in the country, worst team in the American. Like they were down, but to see them have this resurgence, especially with their head coach Amir Abdur-Rahim, who was the head coach at Kennesaw State last year, who led them to 26 wins in an appearance in March Madness, where they lost in the first round to Xavier, who was a talented team in their own right. And he got a few of his guys from Kennesaw State to come with him to USF. And to see them with the success that they're having this year, with 9 straight wins at the moment, could be 10, depending on how they do against Tulsa, which is Wednesday night, which is tonight. And then with the 17-5 overall record, it's going to be a very tough matchup. And this is a nationally broadcast matchup on ESPN, not ESPN2, not ESPNU, not ESPN Plus, ESPN, the OG channel where a lot of people tune in to watch the marquee matchups. And FEU and USF, an in-state rivalry matchup, which we could have had a home and home, since Dusty referred to it when I spoke to him on the Monday presser. Like he wanted 2 matchups against USF, one at Tampa, one at the Burrow. So this matchup is a rivalry that FEU wants to keep marketing, because this is a big rivalry that FEU wants to keep investing in, because it's going to be a very entertaining rivalry in the long term. And for this first matchup, with FEU being a member of the American, it's going to be a very wild game. And I think, unlike Temple, this game will be much closer. And may the best team win. And I think the best team is going to be FAU, who will edge this out within a 5-point margin. Give me FAU 78, USF 73.
Hopefully we can go 2-0 this week. As you just mentioned, Robbie, the floor is yours. What are your predictions for FAU this week?
Well, it's funny. I mean, the 2 games, they're both opposite. Temple's coming in losers of 9 straight, and USF is coming in winners of 9 straight. So it's like we're getting a taste of both. And then there's different things that come with both of those matchup. I mean, people can overlook Temple and just assume they're going to come out, but the game, they've been playing close games. They lost to Charlotte by 3 points, and the game before that, Memphis by 7. So it's like these games are close. I mean, they're losing them, but all it takes is for them to get a few extra bounces the right way, and they're winning these games. So Temple, FAU is really just going to have to come out with the same energy they came out with against Tulsa, come out with good offense all around. I mean, 100 points would be lovely. If they can put up 100 points against Temple, there would be no sweat. But who knows what'll happen? Predictions are tough. You can really never predict basketball, how the game will go. I do think FAU will win, but I'll say 80-70 FAU wins. Temple's still going to try to give the best fight they can, but I think FAU will pull away as they have in the second half. Rez Richards said it's a game where Vlad can really just dominate and build off what he did against Wichita State. And then USF, as I said before, that game is it's going to be tough from the sense of if USF wins against Tulsa 10 in a row is crazy. Their fans are going to be losing their minds against us. So one thing I think FAU really needs to do is just, as I said, make sure they bring that energy. The energy is going to need to be there the whole game. And I don't think that's not like I'm saying it's a problem, but it's easier said than done, right? I mean, to go in there and match the energy of a team that's won 10 in a row and then is now backing that on their home court is going to be tough. But, I think they'll be fine. And then if they get, some outside scoring from guys other than John L. Davis, and Vlad. I think get us Brandon Weatherspoon 20-point performance and Nick Boyd 10-point performance in there. Jalen Gaffney too. He's a guy that's quiet. He does things besides scoring, but he can score the basketball too. So really, just get a little extra scoring performance from one of these non-main guys. Everyone on an FAU team is a main guy, but get some scoring from one of those guys to match USF's offense, and I think FAU can pull that one out too. I'm going to steer away from doing a prediction on that one. I think it's too tough to predict. I think both teams can easily win that game, but to just say that FAU is going to win is tough. I mean, obviously, I think they can, but we'll see what happens. If I had to do I'll do a prediction because Richard did one, but I'll say FAU wins 80-80, and it might be overtime again, and it could easily be flipped on the other side. The line should be a half a point on either side when the gambling lines come out. It'll be a good game for sure.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, as you mentioned at the start, these two teams are opposite. One losing 9 straight, one winning 9 straight. One very bottom of the conference, dead last, one top of the conference. So you get a really tough game and a game where you have a must win versus Temple. Now, with Temple, I agree with Richard. First off, pack the Burrow. I want to see no seats empty on Thursday. We need you there. Still a top 25 team. Come out if you're in Boca. Have nothing to do Thursday night, 7 p.m. I also think you got to give it to Vlad. You want to see him dominate down low. And I like the Owls 88-68, 20-point game, as Richard mentioned. We pretty much have the same score prediction, like in terms of points. And then for USF, that's going to be a really tough game. First off, I do want to just say one thing about USF. For me, I'm driving 4 hours north this Saturday, and it's called South Florida, and I'm driving 4 hours north from Florida. Like, change the name to West Florida. Like, they should not be called South Florida. I mean, we are South Florida, but play USF this Sunday, and USF is a team where they can get hot even if they are down 20 points. Someone you have to watch out for is Chris Youngblood. He's been absolutely killing it. He's had 3 20-plus performance, I believe, in the last 5 games. He's someone who shoots a 3 pretty well. He's shooting 42% from 3, which is like very good. Like probably like one of the best 3-point shooters in the conference. Gotta watch out for him. But I would think that FAU wins this game 84-76. I like the Owls to pull away versus USF late. I think the Owls get up, 15, 10 points at halftime. USF comes surging back and ties it up, and FAU pulls back away late, led by Vlad Golden inside. And I would like to see some other guys contribute a lot in this game. I mean, you got to look at Brian Greenlee, who has been shooting really well the last few games. And he's one of the hardest defensive players on this team. I want to see him get involved. Jalen Gaffney, as Robbie mentioned. And, keep giving Trey Carroll his minutes as he's been doing very well. Hopefully we can see the Giancarlo Rosado we all know and love, and he's not rusty this week. But I do think FAU goes 2-0 this week and is back in the top 20 of next week's AP poll. That will do it for today's episode. As we are recording today is Valentine's Day. For all that are celebrating, make sure that I hope you guys have a great Valentine's Day. And take care, everyone. Go Owls.